or on Boston Free Radio's Facebook page. Either way you could join me. I'm glad you could join me to discuss my favorite topic, which is movies. And this week I have 4 movies to review for you for this show. 3 that are brand new just out this weekend. Another one that I meant to see the weekend before, but I didn't get the chance, but I did this past weekend, and I'm going to review it for you later in the show. First, though, I'm going to start off with my normal segment, which is What's Topping the Box Office. These are the top 10 highest grossing films of this past weekend. And because Christmas is coming, it's really no surprise that the number 1 movie at the box office is The Grinch, which is the new animated film from Illumination Studios, which made an impressive $67.6 million at the U.S. and Canadian box office, and it made $80.7 million at theaters worldwide, and that is against a budget of $75 million, which means that it is not a hit yet here in the States and Canada, I should say states and provinces, but it is a tentative hit around the world so far. So it's off to a very good start and should be at least a tentative hit here at home by next week. Bohemian Rhapsody fell to number 2 this week, but is still pulling in very impressive numbers. It made $31.2 million, that is, at the domestic box office this past weekend. Against a budget ranging from $50 to $55 million, Bohemian Rhapsody has so far grossed $100.4 million at the box office at home, and around the world it has made a staggering $286.3 million. So it's very close to being a certified hit here at home, but around the world it has already reached certified hit status. So very good for Bohemian Rhapsody. Overlord is another new one that came out this week. It's the number 2 highest grossing debut movie of the week, but it is number 3 at the box office, having grossed $10.2 million domestically here at home and $19.3 million worldwide against a budget of $38 million, meaning that it's not a hit yet here in the States or around the world, but it's off to a promising start. Maybe not the best start compared to The Grinch, but still, it has some hope in it. The Nutcracker and the Four Realms from the Walt Disney Company was number 2 when it debuted last week. This week it fell to number 4, having grossed $10.1 million at the U.S. and Canadian box office. Against a budget ranging from $120 to $133 million, the Nutcracker and the Four Realms looks like it's struggling, having made just $35.8 million here at home and $97.3 million worldwide, which means it's not even close to a hit here in the States and Canada, and it's closer to a hit around the world, but it's still not making the money that it probably should or was expected to make, and it looks like this is headed towards becoming a bomb, but then again, I might be speaking too soon. We'll have to see by next week, and I can get a more definitive answer for you. A Star is Born has been in the box office for 6 weeks and is still doing really well. I don't think it's ever been out of the top 5 in its 6 weeks in release. This past weekend, it grossed a decent $8.1 million at the U.S. and Canadian box office. Against a budget ranging from $36 to $40 million, A Star is Born has so far grossed $178.1 million here at home and $323.9 million worldwide, making it a certified hit here in the States and around the world by a mile. The Girl in the Spider's Web, also like Overlord, has struggled a little bit, but not as much as, or rather, it struggled less than Overlord, having made $7.8 million at the domestic box office and actually $16.3 million worldwide, but that is unfortunately against a budget of $43 million. So for a movie of that budget to not debut in the top 5 does not bode well for this film. Nobody's Fool is number 7 at the box office. This took a big drop from number 3 last week to number 7 this week, having grossed $6.6 million at the domestic box office this past weekend. Against a budget of just $19 million, though, Nobody's Fool has so far grossed $24.4 million at the U.S. box office, U.S. and Canadian box office, and around the world it has grossed $24.5 million. As a matter of fact, I don't think that can count because it probably includes just U.S. and Canadian, not every other country. But still, even though it's making its way out of the top 5, it still is a tentative hit here at home, around the world, I don't quite know. Venom is number 8 at the box office, sliding from number 6 last week, and has been out for 6 weeks, which is the exact same amount of time that A Star is Born has been out. It actually does surprise me to see A Star is Born making more money than Venom has, even 6 weeks out, but it's still doing incredibly well for itself. It grossed $4.9 million at the domestic box office this past weekend, against a budget ranging from $100 to $116 million. Venom has so far grossed $206.3 million here at home and $676.2 million worldwide. So it's not making nearly as much money as Black Panther or Avengers Infinity War did, but it's not expected to either. Here at home, it is a tentative hit, and around the world, it is a certified hit by quite a bit. Halloween is a movie I didn't expect to be in the top 10, but this is probably the last week it's going to be in the top 10 because it made $4 million at the U.S. box office this past weekend, and it fell from number 5 to number 9 this week. And against a budget of $10 to $15 million, however, it has made $157 million domestically and $245.5 million internationally, making it a certified hit here in the States and around the world. And finally, The Hate U Give is hanging on at number 10 at the box office, and I didn't actually expect to see it in the top 10 this week, but against a budget of $23 million, The Hate U Give has so far made $26.7 million here at home and $28.8 million around the world, making it a tentative hit here in the States and around the world. But for a movie of this budget, which only got released in independent theaters as opposed to a lot of multiplexes, it's still doing really well for itself, and my guess is you'll probably be hearing a lot more about this come Oscar season, but of course, we'll have to see in just a few weeks.
Whoa, long time no see. It's me, the Rock t-shirt in the back of your closet. Dude, remember? You crowd surfed in me, man. But you haven't worn me in like forever. I get it, you're retired, but I still got some rock left in me. So take me to Goodwill, where I could really make a difference.
Your donations to Goodwill create jobs, training programs, and education assistance for people in your community. To find your nearest donation center, go to goodwill.org. Donate stuff, create jobs. A message from Goodwill and the Ad Council.
Hey, it's Genevieve, a.k.a. Miss Fab 617.
And it's your girl, Crystal, a.k.a. The Crystal Lens.
We're coming to you from our new show called
Boston Come Through. We'll be bringing you the latest and greatest things happening in and around Boston. We'll be talking what? Black-owned businesses, social events, what? And the Black experience. How's that sound, Genevieve?
I love it.
Dig it.
Tune in every Wednesday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time on Boston Free Radio.
Boston, come through. Come listen.
Welcome back to Words on Film, the spoken word show dedicated to moving pictures. I'm your host and movie critic, Dan Burke. The first movie I'm going to be reviewing for you is The Grinch, also known as Dr. Seuss's The Grinch, which is the second theatrical film adaptation of Dr. Seuss's How the Grinch Stole Christmas, and the first and only one that is animated. Of course, I'm not counting the film from 1966, which was narrated by Boris Karloff and featured music by Thurl Ravenscroft. And the reason I'm not counting that is because that movie that short was not released into theaters, although its animation quality by the legendary Chuck Jones was good enough for it to have been released in theaters. But it's also precisely because of that storytelling and that animation quality that short is still a perennial favorite to this very day, literally 52 years after it first came out. And I do also have to say that even though I enjoyed the How the Grinch Stole Christmas, which was directed by Ron Howard and starred Jim Carrey, that movie, with all its ostentatious set design and a good performance by Jim Carrey in general, did not live up to the 1966 TV special, and neither does this animated version of The Grinch, but there are some things I really liked about this movie. And I was actually telling a friend of mine named Matt, who's in the studio with me right now, that I was originally thinking of doing this review in rhyme. And I don't normally write my reviews out, but I was thinking of making an exception with this one. But what can I say? Life got in the way. That's the only rhyme that I will present for you for this show. But the story of The Grinch, a lot of you probably already know. It's a it's a story that's about 30, maybe even 40 pages long. If you haven't read it at Christmas time, then go out to the library or go out to the bookstore and get yourself a copy. It is definitely worth waiting or reading, and it is a timeless classic, as most Dr. Seuss books are. So I don't need to elaborate upon you what the plot of The Grinch is. You probably already know it for yourself. This time, Benedict Cumberbatch is actually the voice of the Grinch, and I think he does a serviceable job as the Grinch, but what was mysterious to me was that Benedict Cumberbatch, who is, of course, British, adopted an American accent for some reason. And one of the things that's strange about that is, first of all, even though Benedict Cumberbatch has played Americans, one of his most famous Americans that he's played is Doctor Strange, he didn't need to adopt an American accent for this movie. It's not as if Whoville is an American territory, or granted, it's not a British colony either, but I would think, considering that the inspiration that this movie obviously took from the Chuck Jones special, they would just let the Grinch be British. But I don't know. That was my only beef with Benedict Cumberbatch voicing the Grinch. He didn't need to be American, but he was anyway. But I had a bigger problem actually with the characters voiced by Rashida Jones and Kenan Thompson, particularly the character voiced by Kenan Thompson. Kenan Thompson, for those of you who don't know, is an African-American actor, and he's actually a mainstay on Saturday Night Live. He actually holds the record for being the cast member who's had the longest tenure on Saturday Night Live, which is 16 years as of this season, and maybe counting. I don't know if he's going to be leaving at the end of this year. Of course, we'll have to find out. But what was strange about Kenan Thompson's character, he plays a character by the name of Mr. Bricklebaum, who is this guy who looks like a lumberjack. He has a big beard, but he also is probably one of the chief protagonists of the story, but maybe an antagonist in the Grinch's eyes, in the sense that he loves Christmas and he decorates his house with a lot of these inflatables and flashy lights, much to the chagrin of the Grinch. But the problem I had with the character of Mr. Bricklebaum was that he appeared to be Caucasian. And that's really risky to do, particularly in these times, especially with the controversy that's going on with Megyn Kelly, and the reason that, probably the primary reason, she lost her slot on the Today Show. But I was very surprised that they didn't make that character black. And Kenan Thompson didn't do anything to change his voice or to make himself sound more Caucasian, which is great. But I just was curious, why didn't just make that character black? It almost seemed like the filmmakers were afraid to do so. And Rashida Jones, who has a black father and a white mother, was also a white character, which didn't sit very well with me. But on top of that, I guess that was a minor problem I had with the movie. But I also had a problem with some of the voice talent that was miscast, including Pharrell Williams, who for some reason served as the narrator of this film. Now, you might remember Boris Karloff being the animator of the original Chuck Jones special, and you might also remember Anthony Hopkins was the voice or the narrator for the 2000 film starring Jim Carrey. Now, I don't have a problem with Pharrell Williams narrating this film because he's not British. That's not a requirement. But he doesn't have a strong enough narrative tone. As a matter of fact, as he was narrating this film, it almost sounded like he was whispering. And I like Pharrell Williams a lot. I think he's a very talented musician and a singer and a rapper, but he just was not the right choice for a narrator of this movie. But I will give The Grinch a little bit of credit that I won't give to other Illumination Studio animated films that were based on Dr. Seuss books. Those other animated films, which include The Lorax and Horton Hears a Who, either had characters that were too bland or they were unnecessarily commercial. Like they inserted songs into the movie that were popular, or maybe they might have been popular years before, but they didn't quite fit the tone of the movie. Unfortunately, even though The Grinch incorporates songs that are Christmas classics like Run DMC's Christmas in Hollis or the Jackson 5, Santa Claus is Coming to Town. I didn't have a problem with that because the songs fit the tone of the movie. But I have to give this film a high checkout because it's not the classic that the 1966 short was, but considering it was by Illumination Studios, it could have been a lot worse. I thought the animation was really good. I loved the way they made Whoville look, as well as some of the Whos, with the exception of the characters that the filmmakers didn't have the guts to make black, even though they should have. And Benedict Cumberbatch shouldn't have been American, but he was good too.
Steven.
Who said that?
Me, down here.
Ugh, what are you, a yellow booger?
I'm a banana slug, Steven.
What are you doing in my room?
I'm your sense of adventure. It's been a long time since we've had an adventure in the forest.
Mom took me to the forest last year.
I'm a slug, Steven. It took me a long time to get here.
You're right. I should get out.
Yeah, the forest is not that far away.
Hey, Mom!
Come to the forest where the more adventurous you lives. Check out discovertheforest.org for cool places nearby. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service and the Ad Council.
Hi, my name is Sam.
I'm Sydney.
And this is The Oppressor's Language, where we bring the truth to you.
Catch us on Friday, 4 to 5 p.m.
on Boston Free Radio.
Welcome back to Words on Film, the spoken word show dedicated to moving pictures. I'm your host and movie critic, Dan Burke. And I said at my first segment of the show that there were 3 films that were brand new this weekend, and there's one that's not exactly brand new. It came out the weekend before, and because life got in the way, I didn't get a chance to review it. But I'm reviewing for you right now because considering it debuted at #1 at the box office last week, I would kick myself if I didn't either see or review this movie. And this is one I've been looking forward to for a long time, but I was cautiously optimistic because it takes on the subject of a very ambitious story. The movie is Bohemian Rhapsody. It's directed by Bryan Singer, who directed all the good X-Men films, as well as The Usual Suspects, which is a modern-day classic film. And as far as I know, this is the first time that Bryan Singer has directed a true story, let alone a rock and roll biopic. But as far as movies about musicians, not just rock musicians go, this is probably one of the best. I would put Bohemian Rhapsody, before I get into exactly what makes it great, I would put it up there with Amadeus as one of the best musician biopics of all time. And I might not change my mind about this, but Bohemian Rhapsody is a biopic about Queen, and it emphasizes a lot of Freddie Mercury's life, and it chronicles the years leading up to Queen's legendary appearance at the Live Aid concert in 1985. So the movie takes place from 1970 to 1985. So Freddie Mercury, for those who don't know, of course, was the lead singer of Queen. That part you probably did know. What you may not know is that he died of AIDS in AIDS-related complications in 1991. Fortunately, this movie ends on a high note. It does mention that in the written epilogue in the end, but this movie does not feature Freddie Mercury's death. So it's not a downer of a movie in that regard, and I think that's appropriate. But as I was watching this film, and as I was watching Rami Malek play Freddie Mercury perfectly, I was just taken aback by how well this movie was, how it told the story of Queen without getting bogged down by too much music trivia. It basically told all the important parts of Queen, but it's such a good movie and incorporates all the songs from Queen, not just Bohemian Rhapsody, but all their classics. And maybe they even left out some of their other really good songs as well. But I was sitting in the theater and watching this and thinking to myself, if this movie were 4 to 5 hours, I would still be enthralled by this film. If it had, of course, the right kind of pacing that this movie has at 2 hours and 15 minutes. But I loved seeing how the song Bohemian Rhapsody got written, how it was recorded. I think all those parts were played incredibly well in this film. I also really liked I would normally call it a cameo, but it's actually bigger than a cameo. The part of Ray Foster, who was an amalgamation of real-life people. Of course, he's a composite character in this movie. He plays an EMI music executive who probably had the same opinions of Bohemian Rhapsody as other music executives did when it came out. And Ray Foster in this film is played fittingly by Mike Myers. And there's one great scene in this film where Ray Foster is listening to Bohemian Rhapsody for the first time, and he doesn't like it. He's going, Scaramouche, Beelzebub, what do these things have to do with one another? What do they mean? But the part that is probably going to get audiences if they know their movie and music history is when Mike Myers, as Ray Foster, says, we want songs that are by rock bands that people can listen to in their cars, that they can headbang to. And this song is never going to be one of those songs. That is a little bit of an allusion to the famous part in Wayne's World where Wayne Campbell, played by Mike Myers, as well as the other people in the car, headbang to Bohemian Rhapsody as they're going around Aurora, Illinois. It's a classic scene. I love it, and it was great that Mike Myers could just very subtly allude to it in here. But what makes Rami Malek's performance as Freddie Mercury great? It's more than just an impersonation. When either Rami Malek has long hair or when he cuts his hair short and grows a mustache, he looks almost exactly like Freddie Mercury except for his eyes. But it's really a lot of the in-depth performance that Rami Malek brings to the character of Freddie Mercury. It's both when you see Freddie Mercury on stage and also when you see him off stage engaging with important people in his life, whether it's the other band members of Queen, including Brian May, who's played in this movie by, I want to say his name is Gwilym Lee. I might have pronounced that name wrong. Forgive me for that, but he's excellent in this film and might be a shoo-in for Best Supporting Actor at this year's Oscars. There's also the drummer, Roger Taylor, who's played by Ben Hardy, and John Deacon, also known as Deaky, who's played by Joe Mazzello from Jurassic Park. I think the way he interacts with his band members in this film is really unique and shows that the rise of Queen might have been an audacious one, but it certainly was no Bed of Roses and no Pleasure Cruise. But I also really liked the character of Mary Austin in this film, was played by Lucy Boynton. Mary Austin was Freddie Mercury's girlfriend, but if you know anything about Freddie Mercury's life, you can kind of tell how that plays out in this as this movie progresses. It doesn't end well, but I really liked how Lucy Boynton played Freddie Mercury's platonic friend, and certainly served, while not as a love interest of his in the long run, certainly a vital part of his life and career. So I don't know what else there is to say. I've only got about 40 seconds left to tell you about Bohemian Rhapsody, but is undoubtedly a knockout and one of my favorite films of the year. This is a movie that took on an ambitious topic, something that no one else has done up to this point, and it could have failed miserably. But fortunately, with great performances by the likes of Gwilym Lee, hope I pronounced the name right, and Rami Malek, this movie soars. This movie shines, and very much like its namesake, it's probably going to be a classic in the years to come. It's certainly one of my favorite films of the year so far.
Most of my family, they never graduated high school, so I'm trying to break that barrier. My daughter Brooklyn was also a motivation for me to go back to school. Every day after work, went straight to school, and it paid off.
At age 26, Kareem finished his high school diploma.
I could not have done it alone. I see the future is really bright for me.
No one gets a diploma alone. If you're thinking of finishing your high school diploma, you have help. Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org. Brought to you by the Dollar General Literacy Foundation and the Ad Council.
Hi, this is Joanna Bremis, hostess of The Joanna Bremis Show here on Boston Free Radio at Somerville Media Center. Tune in every Thursday from 1 to 2 p.m. Please stay tuned for great music, first half of the show in English and second half in Greek. Thank you.
Welcome back to Words on Film, the spoken word show dedicated to moving pictures. I'm your host and movie critic, Dan Burke. The next film I'm going to be reviewing for you is Overlord, which is a brand new film that's come out this past weekend. And this is a film that I knew the name of it, and I knew that J.J. Abrams produced it with his production company Bad Robot, which has made some incredible action and science fiction films over the last couple of years. But other than that, I didn't really know anything about it. And if there's one thing you got to know about me as a film critic, it's that I don't watch movie previews anymore. If I'm watching a YouTube video and a movie preview comes up before the video I want to watch, I basically close my ears and plug my ears and close my eyes. I can't watch it. And that's actually been a rewarding experience for me. So I went into Overlord not knowing what the movie was about. I assumed it was a horror film based on the poster, but I didn't really know. So I'll tell you what it's about right now. It's about a small group squad of American soldiers that find horror behind enemy lines on the eve of D-Day. So this movie takes place in June of 1944, and it primarily involves an armed service member by the name of Boyce, who's played by Jovan Adepo, who is a familiar face. In fact, he's a little bit too familiar because he's a British actor who's been in movies like Fences with Denzel Washington and Viola Davis. He played one of their sons. And he was also in the controversial film Mother from last year, starring Jennifer Lawrence and Javier Bardem. He's a very good actor, but the reason I say he looks too familiar is he's a doppelganger for another black actor by the name of Derek Luke. And as I was watching this film, I thought, that might be Derek Luke, but at the same time, Derek Luke is in his late 30s, whereas Jovan Adepo is actually barely 20. But either way, he's a good actor, and he's in a platoon full of mostly white people, which was probably one of the areas of this film that I didn't think was the most historically accurate, because I don't think that any of the armed services were integrated by World War II. I think they became integrated during the Korean War, and they were most certainly integrated during Vietnam, but I think they were still segregated during World War II. So that's probably one of the areas that may not be the most accurate, but then again, I could be wrong. But in doing my research before the show, I didn't find any evidence that there were integrated platoons during World War II. But regardless, so the character that Jovan Adepo plays is one named Boyce, and I want to say he's in the Marines, but I'm not exactly sure. Either way, he's a member of some sort of armed services, and he actually parachutes into France on D-Day along with some other members of his platoon, including Ford, who's played by Wyatt Russell, and also Waffner, played by Pilo Asbach, who's obviously a Scandinavian. Of what country, I don't know. And there are other various colorful members of this platoon who parachute into France when they're actually on an airplane and are struggling to fight a battle in the air. And ultimately, their plane gets shot down, but they survive because they parachute. And eventually they find themselves in a small French town, and there is a young woman named Chloe, who's played by a very lovely actress by the name of Mathilde Olivier, who's I've never seen in a film before, but after seeing her in this movie, I definitely want to see her in other things. But she eventually shields them from the Nazi-occupied town, and the soldiers' mission is to destroy the Nazi communications in the church tower in the small town in order for other members of American troops, both land, sea, and air, to effectively occupy this town and rid it of Nazi rule. Unfortunately, when Boyce breaks into the church, he finds that the Nazis are engaging in some sort of chemical warfare, or they're using human subjects to do desperate and inhumane experiments. And that's where the horror part of this movie comes in. I won't reveal exactly what he sees. I'm going to leave that up to you to decide, or rather for you to see. But I will tell you that there there are a lot of impressive special effects that take place in this movie, but it is an ultra-violent film, and it is also very horrific. The horror parts of this movie are not for the squeamish. But for me, who's not exactly squeamish when I go to see these either war and or horror films, I was very entertained while also caring deeply for the characters. And while I had some reservations with a black soldier being in a platoon of white soldiers, when that may not have been historically accurate, I still cared for the character of Boyce as well as his other soldiers. And I also was kind of surprised that his other soldiers, or the other white soldiers, didn't give him any grief but for being black. But I will say that once you put historical accuracy aside, you will enjoy this film for what it is, and you'll certainly enjoy the characters. But again, if you don't like violent films, and if you don't like horror films, I would recommend staying away from this one. But I did like this movie for its tribute to B movies. There are certainly a lot of other B movies out there that take place during World War II and embrace Nazi conspiracy theories about their shady science and their obsession with the occult. I'm not exactly sure the accuracy of such conspiracy theories, but it certainly makes for an interesting film. And it's directed by Julius Avery, who has previously brought us, and this is where the internet starts to slow down. He's directed a number of films I haven't seen, but I'm going to look out for him in other movies he might direct. But this gets my rating of a knockout. It is delightfully violent. There are some scenes in here that are very hard to watch, and these are certainly some breakthrough roles for the actors I just mentioned, including Jovan Adepo and Matilda Olivier. I would love to see them in other things, and the special effects people should get some sort of award.
It's important to buckle up your kids.
I know.
Sometimes car seats can be complicated.
I know.
And if your child's in the wrong seat and you get into a crash,
I know.
it could lead to a serious injury.
I know.
So you're 100% sure you have the right car seat for your child's age and size?
I don't know.
Don't think you know. Know you know. Car crashes are a leading killer of children 1 to 13. Make sure you have the right car seat. Visit safercar.gov/the right seat. A message from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
A mighty feast of hot, steaming music brought to you in stereo by BostonFreeRadio.com.
I love those real sick sounds. They're the ones that move me. The thinly blow, neurotic tone. Intensify and groove me.
All this and more on Unpopular Music, Saturdays at noon on Boston Free Radio.
Welcome back to Words on Film, the spoken word show dedicated to moving pictures. I'm your host and movie critic, Dan Burke. The next movie I'm going to be reviewing for you is Boy Erased. This is the latest from director Joel Edgerton. And Joel Edgerton is an actor, of course. That's what he's primarily known for being. I'm not exactly sure off the top of my head if he's directed any... Oh, actually, he directed the movie The Gift from 3 years ago. That was his feature-length directorial debut, so I stand corrected there. So this is his sophomore take at directing a film. And like The Gift, Joel Edgerton also plays a prominent role in this film. He's not the lead in the movie, but he plays an interesting supporting role. So Boy Erased is based on a true story, and it's about the son of a Baptist preacher who is forced to participate in a church-supported gay conversion program after being forcibly outed to his parents. This movie is based on a memoir of the same name by Gerard Conley, and the person who plays Gerard Conley in this movie is Academy Award nominee Lucas Hedges. And Lucas Hedges has had actually quite a year. He was nominated a couple of years ago for his role in Manchester by the Sea, where he was excellent in that film. He was also in Lady Bird and 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, which were excellent films from last year. And this year, he was actually in Mid-90s, which was a film that I also really enjoyed. And he didn't play the lead in that movie, but he was very memorable and really great in that film as well. So Lucas Hedges, this is Boy Erased is probably going to be Lucas Hedges' breakthrough role as a lead actor. I don't think it's his first role as a lead actor, but it's certainly the one where he's probably going to get a lot more roles as lead actor after this one. And this film is probably comparable to another film that Chloe Grace Moretz starred in earlier this year called The Miseducation of Cameron Post. That is also based on a book, but unlike Boy Erased, The Miseducation of Cameron Post is actually a novel. In other words, it is fictional. So there's a little bit more truth in performance as well as story to this film, Boy Erased, that The Miseducation of Cameron Post may not have had the luxury of having. But either way, The Miseducation of Cameron Post was also an excellent film. Boy Erased is just slightly above that film for probably the fact that it's rooted in truth. But Lucas Hedges does an amazing job in the lead of this movie. Actually, I was mistaken when I said that Gerard Conley was the person who wrote this memoir. He might have been the one who wrote the memoir. I'm not exactly sure, but Lucas Hedges in this film plays a character by the name of Jared Emmons. And he might have actually written the article that Gerard Conley ultimately wrote the book for that, upon which this movie was based. But again, I'm sorry for the confusion there. I wish I could look it up, but in either way, it is based on a true story. And Jared Emmons' parents in this movie are played by Nicole Kidman and Russell Crowe. Russell Crowe is the conservative Baptist preacher who is Lucas Hedges' character's father, and he sends Lucas Hedges' character to this gay conversion camp with good intentions, I guess. I'm very apologetic when I say with good intentions, but the only thing is, I know from seeing movies like But I'm a Cheerleader and The Miseducation of Cameron Post, and also what I know about science and psychology, what little I know, that gay conversion therapy does not work. And that is the point of this movie. But actually, the head counselor of this gay conversion therapy is another Baptist preacher who's actually played by Joel Edgerton. And he has good intentions, I'll say that firmly, but the problem comes in when there is another counselor at this gay conversion therapy center who is a self-proclaimed former homosexual who's played actually by Flea of the Red Hot Chili Peppers. And Flea has this very intense look to him that served him well in any movie in which he's either co-starred or made a cameo, from Back to the Future Part 2 to Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas to The Big Lebowski. And he has that very quiet intensity in this movie. Unfortunately, his character is one of the problems of this movie. In other words, the gay conversion therapy doesn't work on the psychological standpoint, but also when Jared, Lucas Hedges' character, begins to see firsthand that this gay conversion therapy center in which he's a part actually has a lot of physical abuse at the hands of some of these counselors. Not Joel Edgerton's character, but others, including Flea's character. So you see Lucas Hedges struggle with being in the center. And even though I'm not gay, when you have a character who is gay and you can identify with his struggling in this center where there are very strict rules about your cell phone use and even about what you write in a diary, I can feel for this character. And that certainly speaks to how great a film this is when even somebody who's not gay, like me, can at least identify in some way with this character and his struggles, and also being put through probably more repression than he deserves and is what's good for him. And this movie gets my rating of a knockout because it is incredibly well acted. I am curious as to why Nicole Kidman, Russell Crowe, and Joel Edgerton himself were cast in this film. I mean, it's obvious why Joel Edgerton was, but the three actors are from the Australian continent, and yet they're playing Americans in the Bible Belt. And I thought that was curious casting, but not bad casting by any stretch of the imagination. As a matter of fact, Nicole Kidman acts in a way in this film that made me want to stand up and cheer for her, which I won't elaborate upon, but you should definitely see this for yourself. Whether you're gay or you're straight, you'll love this movie.
Is my kid in the right car seat? I guess she is.
There are probably rules on when to move up to a booster seat, aren't there?
Rear facing, forward facing. I think I have it right.
Car crashes are a leading killer of children 1 to 13. Are your children in the right car seat for their age and size? Don't think you know you know. Go to safercar.gov/the right seat. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
This is Alan Patterson. I want to invite you all to tune into my music radio show, Voices of Time, heard live each and every Wednesday from 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern Time on Boston Free Radio at bostonfreeradio.com. Voices of Time, while founded on the golden age of music from the 60s and 70s in all its permutations, also visits other eras and many genres. We feature rock and roll from its original era and beyond, rock in all its variations including prog, psychedelia, garage and punk, Motown, old school R&B, soul, blues, jazz, gospel, folk, old school country, zydeco, all music New Orleans, rockabilly, bluegrass, world music, comedy, poetry, and spoken word, and much more. Please come and join me for an adventurous 2-hour ride into the stratosphere of sound where the voices of time reverberate for all eternity.
Welcome back to Words on Film, the spoken word show dedicated to moving pictures. I'm your host and movie critic, Dan Burke. And now that I've reviewed all the movies that I'm going to review for this show, I'm going to get started with a segment that I usually save for the final segment of the show. This is what you're listening to, the next to the last segment of the show. But I'm going to start early with my segment, What's Coming Up Next? This is a spoken word preview of movies that are coming out in theaters this coming weekend. And by this coming weekend, I mean the weekend of November 16th through 18th, 2018. So the biggest film that's coming out in theaters this coming weekend is Fantastic Beasts: The Crimes of Grindelwald. I'm not sure what Grindelwald is or who he is, but this is another film that's actually a sequel to Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, which came out 2 or 3 years ago, and I called that the best of the Harry Potter movies, despite the fact that even though J.K. Rowling wrote the screenplay, she did not actually write a book upon which it's based. But either way, I enjoyed it a lot more than the Harry Potter movies. And I'll say this quickly about the Harry Potter movies. I know that they're high quality, and I know that a lot of people like them, especially people who are younger than me, but because I read the books first, the movies just didn't compare. So Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them had an advantage in that they weren't based on a book that I'd read and enjoyed. And I think because of that, it allowed the film to have probably a little bit more freedom and maybe not the weight of expectations like Harry Potter snobs like me who read the book and know that the book will never measure up to the film. But in any event, in the second installment of the Fantastic Beasts series, set in J.K. Rowling's Wizarding World, This features the adventures of magizoologist Newt Scamander, who's played again by Eddie Redmayne, and the other actors in the film, the primary actors, Catherine Waterston, Dan Fogler, and Alison Sudol, also make appearances in this film. And in addition to those characters, there are also some new characters. In fact, I think that Grindelwald in this film is played by Johnny Depp. I could be wrong about that. I'm looking actually it up now. Yep, actually it is. Johnny Depp in this movie plays Gellert Grindelwald, who I guess is the villain of the film. And there are other actors in the film who weren't in the previous film but are in this one, including Ezra Miller, Jude Law, Zoe Kravitz, and others. This is a film I'm really excited to see. I will grant you that Johnny Depp is in a little bit of a career rut right now, similar to Adam Sandler, in that he's making movies, but they're not nearly as critically or commercially well received as they used to be. But this might actually be a comeback for Johnny Depp. I'd be very curious to see if it is. I'm certainly not making any assumptions as to whether or not the movie's going to be good, but I am excited about seeing it, and I will let you know what I think come next week's show. Another movie that's coming out in theaters this coming weekend is one called Instant Family, and this stars Mark Wahlberg and Rose Byrne as a couple who find themselves in over their heads when they adopt 3 children. Why they adopt 3 children, I don't exactly know, but this is a film that I guess you could qualify it as being a romantic comedy or a family comedy, and unlike the father that Mark Wahlberg played in the Daddy's Home movies, this is a film where he actually plays a father who wants to do well, or at least I assume he does. And Sean Anders has had a mixed career as a writer and a director. He wrote both Daddy's Home movies, which I enjoyed. As a director, I'm actually afraid to see... Oh, God. Yep. He directed That's My Boy, which was a terrible, terrible movie. But, yeah, oh, man, tell me about it. But I think that movie was bad mainly because of Adam Sandler, but him being the director didn't exactly help. He directed Horrible Bosses 2, which I thought was a decent sequel. It definitely wasn't better than the original, but I was impressed with what he did with both Daddy's Home movies. Some people were disappointed with those. I found myself enjoying them. They weren't perfect, but I would be interested to see how Instant Family is. It looks kind of good, and Rose Byrne is certainly what's the word I'm trying to use? I would say a competent actress when it comes to these kinds of comedies, and she's been in a lot of movies this year. So I'm going to give Instant Family a chance. The fact that Sean Anders directed That's My Boy is probably his biggest liability, but he might redeem himself with this film. But this is a film very much like The Crimes of Grindelwald that I will see, and I will let you know what I think of it come next week's show. There is another gritty crime drama, or a crime drama that's intended to be gritty, which is called Widows, and it's directed by Steve McQueen, who directed 12 Years a Slave. And Steve McQueen did not win an Oscar for Best Director. I think the director of Gravity won that, and I can't remember his name, but 12 Years a Slave did win Best Picture, and I think that Steve McQueen will eventually win Best Director. Whether it's with this film, I can never exactly tell. But this movie is set in contemporary Chicago amidst a time of turmoil, and it's about 4 women with nothing in common who accept a debt left behind by their dead husband's criminal activities. They take fate into their own hands, and they conspire to forge a future on their own terms. This movie has an all-star cast, including but not limited to Viola Davis, Michelle Rodriguez, Elizabeth Debicki, and the other cast is loading right now. Forgive me for the internet being slower than I'd like. The movie also co-stars Liam Neeson, John Bernthal, let's see, anybody else I know? Robert Duvall is in it, Colin Farrell. So it looks like a very solid cast of excellent actors. And the director, Steve McQueen, of course, told you had directed 12 Years a Slave. I think this is probably the first film he's directed that hasn't starred or co-starred Michael Fassbender, which may or may not be good. I certainly am interested to see what Steve McQueen does with this film. I don't think he's directed a film like this, certainly not with an all-star cast, if you don't count 12 Years a Slave, but the all-star cast wasn't the selling point of 12 Years a Slave either. But he also hasn't directed a crime drama like this that I know of. So Widows is another film that I will definitely make it a point to see, and I'll let you know what I think come next week's show.
You took the first step and quit smoking, but even former smokers may still be at risk for lung cancer. That's why SaveByTheScan.org wants you to know about a new low-dose CT scan that can detect lung cancer early. It takes only 60 seconds and could save your life. You took the first step, now take the next. Visit SaveByTheScan.org for a simple quiz to see if you're eligible and talk to your doctor about screening. SaveByTheScan.org is brought to you by the American Lung Association's Lung Force Initiative and the Ad Council.
Every Tuesday at 3, something special happens on Boston Free Radio. Why, it's Toppers with your host, Gil. Toppers, spinning the tunes that today's youth demand, from Justin Bieber to Lady Gaga to the Fleetwoods, and, on occasion, Hoagie Carmichael. If you missed the program, you can check out the archives at Toppers Radio, that's one word, .blogspot.com. Toppers.
Welcome back to Words on Film, the spoken word show dedicated to moving pictures. I'm your host and movie critic, Dan Burke, and I'm continuing with my segment, What's Coming Up Next? However, the three films that I mentioned before the break, Fantastic Beasts, The Crimes of Grindelwald, Instant Family, and Widows, are the only films that are coming out in theaters nationwide. In other words, regardless of where you live, where you're listening to this, those three will be coming out at a theater near you. These other films that I'm going to mention are coming out in limited release, so I can't guarantee whether or not they're going to be coming out in a theater near you. I can barely guarantee if they're coming out in a theater near me. But rest assured, they will eventually be coming out in the theater near you, especially given that the first film I'm going to mention is Green Book, which is a film I'm pretty confident will be coming out in Boston first. This is a movie that is directed by Peter Farrelly of the Farrelly Brothers, who has directed Dumb and Dumber, Kingpin, There's Something About Mary, and other gross-out comedies. So I think this is the first film that he's directed that's been a straight-out drama. But it is based on a true story. It's about a working-class Italian-American bouncer who becomes the driver of an African-American classical pianist on a tour of venues through the 1960s American South. That sounds like an amazing story to me. The Italian-American bouncer is played by Viggo Mortensen, who is not Italian, not even Italian-American, strangely enough. Actually, he is American, excuse me. He was born in New York, but I think he might have actually been raised somewhere else. Either way, he has a very Scandinavian name. So it's interesting he'd be cast as an Italian-American. But the African-American classical pianist is played by Academy Award winner Mahershala Ali. That's how I pronounce his name. I've heard it pronounced Mahershala, but I'm going to pronounce it Mahershala unless I hear from enough credible sources that it's pronounced the other way. But I'm really excited about this one. Viggo Mortensen is an Academy Award nominee. Mahershala Ali is an Academy Award winner. I loved Mahershala Ali in Moonlight, of course. He was also very good in other movies he's been in, like Hidden Figures and Roxanne. So I would love to see Green Book if it's coming out in the theater near me. And if I do actually see it, I will let you know what I think come next week's show. Another movie that's slated to come out in limited release is a movie that looks like Oscar bait. I'm not saying whether or not that makes the movie good or bad, but it is called At Eternity's Gate, and it's where Willem Dafoe plays Vincent van Gogh. It's a look at the life of painter Van Gogh during the time he lived in Arles and a town I can't pronounce in French. I didn't take French in junior high or high school, so I'm not even going to try to pronounce that name. Let me just say that it's a small town that's not Paris. That's all I'm going to say about it. So the movie also co-stars Rupert Friend, Oscar Isaac, and a guy by the name of Mads Mikkelsen. Obviously a Scandinavian name, like Viggo Mortensen. So this movie looks like a shoo-in for an Oscar nominee for Willem Dafoe, but of course I can't say whether or not it is good, but it certainly looks like a challenging role for Willem Dafoe. And this is coming from somebody who's played 2 Vietnam War veterans and Jesus Christ, in addition to other characters, real and not real. But I always take a chance with Willem Dafoe. He always chooses his projects wisely. And even bad films he's been in, I can't think of any, but he's usually the stronger actor in the film, as you would expect. But I am going to look out for that film, and if I see it next week, or rather this weekend, I'll let you know what I think come next week's show. The last movie I'm going to mention for this segment, excuse me, is one called The Last Race, which is a documentary and is a portrait of a small-town stock car racetrack and the tribe of blue-collar drivers that call it home, struggling to hold on to an American racing tradition as the world around them is transformed by globalization and commercialization. This sounds like an amazing premise for a documentary. I can't exactly say how this documentary is. I think documentaries are always the hardest for me to review because I still, even as a film critic, can't quite differentiate between what makes a good documentary from a great documentary. I've seen some bad documentaries, but either way, documentaries are always a genre I give a chance. I'm always wrong about which ones are going to be nominated for Oscars and which ones aren't. I'm always wrong about that, but in any event, if The Last Race is coming out of the theater near me, I will see it next week and I'll let you know what I think. But that concludes this episode of Words on Film for today. I am your host and movie critic, Dan Burke. And just as a reminder, the views and opinions expressed on Words on Film about movies or otherwise are solely those of yours truly, your host and movie critic, Dan Burke, and they do not necessarily reflect or represent the views and opinions of any employees who are working at the station airing this broadcast or the station as a whole. As usual, I've had a blast talking about movies with you, and until next week's show, this is Dan Burke saying I'll see you at the movies.